What was your reaction to the success of To Kill a Mockingbird? I often wondered how an author who wrote what became an immediate smash would react.
Well, my reaction to it was not one of surprise. It was one of sheer numbness. It was one of being hit over the head and knocked cold. I never expected that the book would sell in the first place. I was hoping for a quick and merciful death at the hands of the reviewers, but I was hoping that maybe somebody might like it well enough to give me some encouragement about it.
New York, 1957. After nothing but rejection letters, Harper Lee was finally meeting with the publisher. Editor Tay Hohoff later wrote about that first encounter.
On a hot day in June in 1957, a dark-haired, dark-eyed young woman walked shyly into our office on Fifth Avenue to meet most of the editorial staff. Apparently, we looked formidable. Harper Lee has since admitted she was terrified.
Her full name was Nell Harper Lee. She was 31 and a long way from the hills and fields of Alabama and her small town of Monroeville. Now, after 8 years of supporting herself as an airline reservation agent, Lee had a manuscript, a novel entitled Atticus. And on that hot day in June, no one could have predicted what that manuscript would become. A literary and film phenomenon called To Kill a Mockingbird.
The evil assumption that all Negroes lie, all Negroes are basically immoral beings, all Negro men are not to be trusted around our women.
The story of a Southern lawyer who defends an innocent man and his daughter who refuses to see things in black and white has never lost its power or meaning. 50 years and nearly 50 million copies later. But To Kill a Mockingbird might never have been, if not for an extraordinary act of friendship. Christmas 1956. With no time off from her job, Lee stayed in New York City.
To a displaced Southerner, Christmas in New York can be a rather melancholy occasion.
She later wrote in an essay for McCall's magazine. Harper Lee spent the holiday with her closest friends in the city, Joy and Michael Brown.
She used to come down, 3 and 4 and 5 times a week and spent a lot of time with us. And then we had 2 little boys.
And Nell often babysat for us, and they loved her. She was really part of the family.
I thought back then that essentially she was a writer. She was not going to spend her life taking airline reservations or waitressing or what one does while one becomes something else.
A very Merry Christmas is what I wish for you.
So when Michael, a songwriter and composer, finished a show and got paid,
I thought, here we have a tiny chunk of money. Why don't we see if Nell could take some time off? And I mentioned it to Michael, who immediately said, I think that's a great idea.
There was an envelope on the tree, addressed to me. I opened it and read, "You have 1 year off from your job to write whatever you please. Merry Christmas."
We had read character sketches that she wrote about people in Monroeville, and they were so perceptive. She just amazed us.
"It's a fantastic gamble," I murmured. "It's such a great risk." My friend looked around his living room, at his boys, half buried under a pile of bright Christmas wrapping paper. His eyes sparkled as they met his wife's, and they exchanged a glance of what seemed to me insufferable smugness. Then he looked at me and said softly, "No, honey, it's not a risk. It's a sure thing."
I knew if she could get her work seen, there she'd have it. And it was little enough to do for a fellow Southerner. Again, that tribal thing, you know.
Our faith in you is really all I heard them say. I would do my best not to fail them.
But I never foresaw anything like this, like what happened.
They published 5,000 copies, for heaven's sakes. Who was going to buy 5,000 copies of her book? Maybe 1,000 copies, but who else was going to ever buy this book?
Ladies and gentlemen, Gregory Peck. The world never seems as fresh and wonderful, as comforting and terrifying, as good and evil, as it does when seen through the eyes of a child. For a writer to capture that feeling is remarkable, and perhaps that is why one book in the last few years has been so warmly embraced by tens of millions of people. To Kill a Mockingbird, winner of the Pulitzer Prize and just about every other award a book can win. And now, happily, To Kill a Mockingbird becomes a motion picture, and its memorable characters come vividly alive. I remember when my daddy gave me that gun. He told me that I could shoot all of the blue jays I wanted, if I could hit them. But to remember, it was a sin to kill a mockingbird.
The movie, written by Horton Foote and considered one of the best screen adaptations of all time, won 3 Academy Awards.
Gregory Peck in
You don't get a chance to have a film or a book like that very often that makes such an impact on people's lives.
I remember starting it and just devouring it. I fell in love with Scout. I wanted to be Scout. I thought I was Scout.
It was the first time in my life that a book had sort of captured me. That was exciting. I didn't realize that literature could do that.
I was still in college when it came out. I was so struck by the universality of small towns. I had lived in small towns in South Dakota. And I knew then, reading about Atticus, the kinds of, not just pressures that he was under, but the magnifying glass that he lived in.
I got it off the bookmobile in Big Stone Gap, Virginia, and I was 12 years old. It's a perfect time to read it because you start to be really aware of differences of people in the community, and I always was aware of an ethnic difference because we were Italians in a small southern town, so we always felt like we were from Pluto.
I read a tattered copy in my house in Jamaica, Queens. It was the first time I read a book by a white writer that really discussed the issues of racism in any way that was complicated and sophisticated.
I was on the porch of Miss Wandy Biggs's house. It was 2 doors down from Nell Harper Lee's house. And I was about 9 years old, and it's the reason I'm a writer.
I remember taking that feeling of integrity and sense of conscience and the idea that the way you behaved, whether people saw you or not, was central to becoming yourself.
Masterpieces are masterpieces not because they are flawless, but because they've tapped into something essential to us, at the heart of who we are and how we live.
This was one of the first books I wanted to encourage other people to read. You know, read this book, read this book, read this book.
Half a century later, the novel is still required reading.
I taught high school for 25 years, and just about every year I did To Kill a Mockingbird with students, and it was a book that perennially they read because they wanted to, not because they had to. So it cast the same spell for my students as it had for me.
Which particular scene that resonates with you, that you remember and will probably remember forever? Nick?
When Atticus is questioning Mayella Ewell, and it's so obvious to everyone in that courtroom that she just made the whole thing up, that Tom Robinson was innocent, and yet the racism in that time was so great, they couldn't let a black man who was obviously innocent go free.
Tom was broken by the court case, and he really didn't want to live or didn't want to be in prison like in a world like that anymore, where he could be prosecuted for no just reason. And the pain that Mrs. Robinson felt when Atticus told her that Tom had been shot 17 times, that really will stick with me for a while, and I think about it a lot.
It really teaches about judgment. I mean, in the book, how do you judge Bob Ewell? Do you judge him as some maniac, or you feel bad for him? You can't. It's all about judgment, and that's in life too. You have to make decisions.
They dip their foot into the water, and then they ease into the stream, and the story and the language and the voice in particular take them down a smooth ride. And then you don't have to worry about whether or not they're doing the assignments. They're reading voluntarily.
Has this book been so special to people over the years?
This book, the truth that it told, it helped people, go see what it was really like. This book told you what it was really like. And the people, of course, talk differently, they act differently, but they're the same people. Same people, different time period.
All right. Now, what about the language? How does it make you feel, Clifford? Is it going to keep you from reading the book?
No.
No. All right, what do you think?
It is offensive because that stands for, you didn't know anything, ignorant, and you just...
What stands for that?
The N-word. Even though it uses that language, it kind of influences you to keep reading.
Yeah, okay. I wanted us to talk a little bit about the impact and how important this novel is.
The book, inspired me because it showed how one person can change the whole world.
It still has this galvanizing effect on a young reader. I mean, it remains as relevant today as it was the very day that it was written. It never ages.
Harper Lee, who was 34 when To Kill a Mockingbird was published, gave several interviews about the novel and the movie, and then stopped. Lee has made appearances, mainly to accept awards, but hasn't granted an interview in more than 45 years. Though the author has receded from public life, her characters remain indelible for generations of readers.